If you drive a truck for a living, one thing for sure that you're going to encounter are D.O.T. inspections in the course of your career. Happens to all of us. I just thought I'd go through a few tips with you to help you get through those. They're just like anybody else. There are good ones, there are bad ones. Not all of them graduated at the top of their class. Go into the inspection with a positive mental attitude. Be polite, courteous, and patient with these guys. Listen to what they have to say. Don't be yammering off and talking. Some of these guys can be a wealth of information because some of these guys have been around for a long time and really know their stuff, and you can learn from these guys. So just listen to what they have to say. If you've got an intelligent question or two, go ahead and ask it, but for the most part, stay quiet. The object of the game is to get through this and get out of there and back on the road. Now, if the guy says something you disagree with, don't argue with him. Shut up. Listen to what he has to say, take the ticket, and if you're going to fight it in court. Don't fight it with the inspector, because I can tell you right now, any confrontation with a D.O.T. inspector is one that you're going to lose, and it may help you rack up even more fines and tickets if you tick this guy off. So keep your mouth shut, take the ticket, and if you're going to fight it in court. Something that will help you through these inspections is to know your documentation and know your e-log. Have your documentation, have your book in order. If you ask for your cab card, for instance, know which one is the cab card. Know which one is the insurance slip. Know which one is the IFTA. Make sure they're all current and up to date. If you're running an electronic log, know how to access that thing to get the information this guy's asking for. If you're hauling something like hazmat, for instance, be familiar with your placarding and the requirements for handling that substance. Have that at the ready too, because this guy may ask for that if he sees that you're placarded. Now, it's come to our attention, the trucking industry, through the media, that some states and provinces operate their D.O.T. offices on a quota basis. Now, that isn't to say that they're all that way, but apparently a lot of them are these days. So you may get tickets or a little bit picky. Most guys will just, if they see a minor infraction, they'll point it out to you and let it go till you get adjusted or fixed it. But if you're in one of these quota states or provinces, they're going to write you a ticket for everything, because these guys are mandated by their employers to raise revenue, basically, for the government that they're working for. So it's got nothing to do with safety sometimes, depending on where you are. It's all got to do with revenue. Now, I don't agree with that, but that's just the way it is some places. Now, when I was thinking about my encounters with the D.O.T. in various places over the years, one of my favorites was getting pulled into a truck stop in Louisiana one day. I was bobtailing in. I dropped my trailer at the wash, and I was bobtailing back to the truck stop, and it was on the CB radio that there was an inspector working back and forth and in front of the truck stop, and he tagged me as I was bobtailing in and had me pull into the truck stop and told me he wanted to do an inspection. He looked at my logbook. At the end of it, he points, and under my hood, the hood's open, he points under my hood, he says, your carburetor's leaking. Now, I'm an older guy, and I thought, well, maybe I misheard him or something like that. My hearing's not that great. And I said, pardon? He said, your carburetor's leaking. And I started to smile, but I knew that I shouldn't, because we all know there's no carburetor on a diesel engine. But I spotted what he was pointing to, and I said, you mean the compressor? And his response was, I call it a carburetor. And right then and there is a chance to make a fool of this guy, but that is not in your best interest. Just shut up and stay quiet, and that's what I did. And he just let me off with a warning for having a leaking carburetor when he was really talking about my compressor seeping a little bit of oil because the truck was older. But keep your mouth shut and walk away, because you won't win an argument with him and you can do yourself some damage. I had just picked up my brand new Great Dane reefer from the factory, and I was on my way home with it. And I'd had the side rails painted to match my truck. So the undercarriage of the trailer was blue, the side rails were blue, and everything underneath was blue, the tire rack, everything. So I got pulled into the scale on my way home. The trailer was empty, and they decided to do an inspection on me. Well, the inspector looks underneath the trailer and says, your airlines are cracked. And he's pointing to the airlines that run to the bogies, that hang underneath the trailer and run to the bogies. And I looked, and what had happened was at the factory, when they're spraying underneath, they sprayed the airlines blue, just like everything else under there. But these hoses were spring mounted underneath the trailer. They're bouncing up and down. So the hoses are flexing, and the paint is cracked. He says, you can't leave before you change those air hoses. The service truck comes out, the mechanic looks at it, and tells the inspector exactly the same thing that I had just gotten through telling him. This guy didn't care what the mechanic thought either. This guy was right, everybody else was wrong, and we ended up having to change the airlines on a brand new trailer just to get out of there to satisfy this guy. And that was in the province of Ontario. They have a quota system. He just needed the money. The province needed the money. But there's an example of even when you're right, you're wrong. I had one friend that I trucked with, and he had his heavy mechanics ticket. And not only did he have the ticket, he was highly skilled. He knew his equipment backwards and forwards. He worked on the thing himself. Nobody else worked on it. He was an expert at it. And back then, the big thing at the time was these CVSA stickers. If you were going into California, if you had a current CVSA sticker on your windshield, generally they'd leave you alone as you pass through the state. They'd look at the sticker, realize that you'd recently been inspected, give you the green light, and off you'd go. So my buddy got his truck all fixed up before he left home and made sure that everything was just mint. And he rolled into Truck E because his goal was he wanted one of these CVSE current stickers. Well, rolling into a scale and then asking for something like that can be asking for trouble, and that's exactly what happened to him. He came out of there with all sorts of nitpicky little fines that added up to over $3,000. And it was enough that it kept him out of California for years because he was so mad he didn't want to pay these tickets. He knew that they were stupid fines rather than valid fines, but he just couldn't win. He had to either pay it or take it to court. He chose to stay out of California for 10 years. And then when he decided he did want to go back to California, he was another 2 years straightening it out with the court system out there. And then he paid penalties on top of the fines. And it was a giant mess. The moral of this story, I guess, is that don't go looking for trouble. Don't voluntarily go in there and try to show one of these inspectors how bright you are and how much knowledge you have. They're not interested in that. They don't want to be your friend. Try to avoid getting into conversations that can lead you in trouble. That's why I say, when you're being inspected or when you run into these guys, don't try to impress them with your brilliance. Just stay quiet, step to the side, suck it up, and carry on. Another time, I had unloaded late on a Friday night in Las Vegas, Nevada. Then I'd gone to the casino and hit the buffet, and I was loading in Bakersfield Saturday morning. So I was fairly late coming across the top there, across 58. My logbook was up to date. I was legal. The trailer was empty. Everything was good. And I unintentionally blew past the Mojave scale, because in California at the Mojave scale, they don't flash lights when they're open. They just have an open sign. And I'd been out in the left lane passing another truck about the time I got to that scale. It's in the dark, it's on a little hill, and just about the time I was abreast of the scale, I remembered it was there and looked over, and to my horror, I saw that the inside lights were on, and I saw a guy hop up from the desk and look out the window at me as I rolled on by the scale. I thought, oh man. I rolled on by, and the guy that I'd been passing had made the same mistake I had. So two of us had blown the scale unintentionally. So I pulled in front of him and started watching my mirror, and this big old California Highway Patrol, it was a big Dodge Polaris at the time, came shooting out of that scale like a rocket sled on rails. And he had us both corralled before we got a mile down the highway. Pulled us both over, one after the other, made us spin around, took our licenses right there at the spot, had us spin around. We had to go back to Mojave, turn around, and then come back again into the scale. But he was a little annoyed with me for having done it. And I guess, it was after midnight. He didn't expect to have to get up from the desk, I guess. But I said to him honestly, I said, I'm empty. I'm legal. I'm headed for Bakersfield in the morning. Completely my mistake. I'm sorry. And he kind of looked at all my paperwork and went all the way through it. And at the end he said, well, everything is fine. Your logbook's up to date. So in Kern County, for making a mistake like that, the fine's $113. He said, if your logbook hadn't been up to date, hadn't been up current, the fine would have been $1,300. So there was a lesson right there, is to always keep your logbook current. So there's another good reason to be just courteous and honest with these guys. Tell them the truth and keep your paperwork up to snuff always. Here's another story that happened to me. And I was coming out of California. I was loaded right up, and I was coming into the port of entry out of Utah, going into Wyoming. I was headed east. Oh, it was late. It was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and they have a roll across scale, and then you go in and show them your permits and such. So I'd gone across the rolling scale and gone in and around back, and I noticed as I was coming in the scale, there's a speed limit on those scales, and I was down to the speed limit or slightly below, because I wanted them to get an accurate reading on my axle so I wouldn't have any trouble. But I noticed there was a guy that came in right behind me, and he almost nosed up to the back of my trailer, and he'd been speeding coming up to the scale, so he came across the plate more quickly than I certainly would have, and then he wheeled around back, and I was sitting in my truck. I hadn't gone in yet, and the inspector came out to the truck. I'm going to have you and that other guy go across the plate again, and we're going to stop you and axle weigh you guys, because something's wrong. I stopped. They axle weighed me and pulled around back again, but the guy that had rushed in behind me was way heavy on his rear axles, and that's how they'd caught that guy. As much as he tried to bluff his way through it by snugging up to me and just praying they got a false reading but didn't pay any attention to it, they caught him. So those guys can be pretty sharp when they're paying attention. I had to laugh, and this guy just made matters worse than by arguing with him, and that was just a no-win deal. But I rolled out of there unscathed, and I'm sure he was in there for quite a while. I got pulled off the highway to the side of the highway one day, quite a while ago now, in Tennessee. So I opened the door. They don't like you to get out of the truck. So I opened the door so he could see him in. He climbed up on the step, and he was looking around. He asked to see my logbook. But I noticed that he was studying the floor quite a bit on the cab of the truck. So after a while, everything's fine. He says, yeah, your book's good. You're in good shape. I can't see anything wrong. Gonna let you go. And I just had to know. I said, you were looking at the carpet. Why were you looking at the floor of my truck? He was looking for roach burns in the carpet. And that was one of the ways he was checking to see if there might be drugs in the truck. He told me all of this because I didn't get it. And he said that, if there are roach burns, what he considered to be roach burns, in the carpet around the seat, that was suspicion of drugs, and then he would have taken the truck apart looking. And I said, well, how can you tell that from a cigarette burn? He said, the cigarette burns are fairly big and circular. He said, roach burns are a lot smaller and misshapen. He says, we can tell the difference right away. So if you've got your ducks in a row, if you're a pro, if you treat them with courtesy, you're going to come out of these things unscathed. But if you go into it looking like an idiot, you're going to come out of it looking like an idiot too. But don't mess with these guys, because you can get the occasional idiot that's more than happy to sit there and write you $5,000 worth of tickets if he's so inclined. Stay safe, be professional, and I'll see you on the back haul.